I'm out here in the forest today, and in this autumn season, the leaves are all really falling, and all the lower layers of the forest have pretty much all shed their leaves at this point. One of the things that's kind of cool at this time of year is to go out and actually look at the micro topography of the landscape that you explore when you get outside. What I mean by micro topography is if we kind of look out and we can see through the whole forest floor, and this area is fairly flat, but then you also get things like right here. I'm not sure how well this shows up because it really is very minor, but there's actually a little dip here. So micro topography is any sort of change in elevation, these little humps and dips in the forest floor, these changes in elevation that happen on a small scale that would not show up on a topographical map. It's things that you can just observe very plainly with the human eye, and they actually tell us useful things about the forest. What I thought I would do today is just sort of walk around and get some shots of some micro topography features and talk about them a little bit, and really talk about tuning your own eyes, because it's not something that people really think about all that much, but you can learn a lot from doing this, and it's really quite simple to do. Tuning our eyes to micro topography can really help a lot with navigation. It's one of my favorite ways to actually navigate through a forest. Like when you tune your eyes to these subtle changes in topography that might not actually show on a topographical map, but you can see them with your own eyes, it helps you navigate much more fluently through a landscape. Because in the same way that a few weeks back I made a video about how to develop your sense of direction, and we were anchoring on waypoints like trees and distinguishable rocks in the forest, and just like visual sort of things that you can see. These subtle changes in topography in the forest can also be like landmarks for you, but they often, because you're cueing on the actual forest floor itself, the actual layout of the forest, they're oftentimes easier to see from further away. And so I find them to be a little bit more useful. It's like you have to think about it less in order to actually follow these things. And so I'll give you an example of this. So right now we are in a forest that, if we look around and we just sort of take that question of, what can I observe in the micro topography of this landscape? One of the things that we can observe here is that this forest is relatively flat. There's a little bit of elevation coming up here, but it's sort of flat along here. It maybe goes up a little bit through here, but generally, we're not seeing anything that's like a major disturbance in the topography of this forest. But if I swing around and show you, I'm standing on a trail here, and show you the other side here, we're looking here towards a little hill that, if I look at it, the top of this hill is basically at my eye level. So from my feet all the way up this little hill here is 5-6 feet. So it's really not that big of a change in elevation, but it's pretty big. We can look down here, and all the way from here it comes all the way up. There's a bit of a ridge line at the top, and then it swings back down like this. So let's say we wanted to use this for navigation. Well, one thing that we can do is sort of just walk around the perimeter of it, and if I want to get back to this spot, I can use this hill as an anchor point, because it can be seen from quite far away. I can see it from all the way on the other side. I can see it from over there. I can see it from further down the trail. I can see it from very far away. And so it's a good way for me to feel my place in the forest and basically know where I am. Another little thing I'll point out here is that as we look at this, overall flat forest, there's also this little, it's almost like someone has taken a chunk out of the forest floor. There's a big hole right here. And as I walk around this forest, there's a lot of these little holes. There's this one here, and I don't know how well these are showing up on the camera, but it's just, maybe about 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, and it's like a chunk just taken out of the forest floor. Sometimes these are caused by, say in the past there was a really big tree here, and then it fell over and it took the root ball came up with it. And sometimes that can leave a pretty big hole in the forest floor. I'm not sure if that's what happened here, but it's just an observation that I've made in this particular forest that I don't see in other forests. So we're coming up to a point here where we can really, there is actually a noticeable change in elevation where, the trail is going definitely up the hill, and it's actually part of this hill that we're following, which we can see much more clearly now is actually a ridge line. And it gets a little bit obscured behind all these pines, but we can still follow it. We'll still be able to see it as we go around. And as we follow through the trail also going in the other direction, the direction that we're heading, it noticeably goes down. And so we're going to head into a little valley that is connected to this hill. So I'm standing at a trail intersection from where we came from, up that trail and down into the low point in this valley. And if you were to follow through to the other side, it goes up the next hill. But there's also another trail that goes and follows up through this valley, and it is sort of sloping upwards a little bit. But basically what this means is that as long as I keep this hill on my right, I always know exactly where I am. And that really comes in handy when you're navigating over large areas of land, because rather than having to think about it in terms of, landmarking on trees, which can only be seen from, a relatively short distance, you can use landmarks on a much larger scale. You can really see the bowl shape of this valley, this little flowway for water, where the elevation is high on that side, and then it swings down. It's low in here, and then it swings up, and then at the same time the elevation up there is higher, and down there it's lower. Now actually, one of the interesting things here that I'll point out is I mentioned earlier that this is a great time of year to be observing microtopography, because all the lower level shrubs have lost their leaves, which quite plainly in this shot here, it's very interesting to observe that in the valley the shrubs have not lost all their leaves. I mean, some of these shrubs have green leaves on them still, and they're actually obstructing the view quite a lot. So it might actually be better for me to wait a little bit more before making this video. But it's also very instructive, because the fact that these shrubs are green is connected to the elevation. The fact that they're in the valley, maybe they have different access to water, which keeps them lush for longer. Maybe they have a little bit more protection from the elements. Maybe it's that the conditions in this space just enables a more resilient plant to grow here. And this is the kind of stuff that we learn from just going out and observing the little changes in elevation. And you know, you kind of make discoveries like, wow, all the plants in this little valley here are green and have their leaves, and they're, you know, still growing along their merry way. But everything, you know, further up has already lost its leaves. And so already, just by going out and observing this, we're starting to learn from the forest. The forest is teaching us. We're able to learn a lot of really interesting stuff just from starting from observation. I had no idea that we were going to find this when I came out today. You know, it wasn't on my list of things to show you. But we discovered it nonetheless, just because my intention here is just to make observations and take you along for the ride. This could have further implications for the types of insects that are still active in this place. There might be animals that are drawn to these plants. You might find, and I think you would expect to find in a little ravine situation like this, a little dry creek bed, there will be animal associations with this space that are different from what you would find up on the top of that other hill. So we've made it roughly around to the other side of this little ridge. I can't actually go too much farther in that direction. It does go further, but there's a no trespassing sign over there, so I can't actually access that part of the ridge. But there's another one of those little holes right there, and the trail right along here, and then another one of those holes right there. It almost seems like man-made, these holes that I'm seeing all over the place. I suspect that this forest was logged not too long ago, and that these might be an effect of something that was maybe done when the logging happened. But all I really want to point out with this is that just knowing that we're on that same ridge as what we were on the other side, if I want to get back to that spot that we were at, I've been walking for like 5-10 minutes now. I don't have to retrace my steps, go all the way back down into the valley and circle back around. If I want to get back to that same spot, I can just cut right across the ridge. And it's because I recognize that it's the same hill, it's the same topography that's appearing in front of me. And that does give you a navigational fluency to be able to just walk around and know where you are, and to take cues off the humps and dips and elevation changes in your forest. In a different part of the forest, we can see that there's, and actually not too far away from where we were before, I've come down in elevation a little bit, and we've entered a place where the landscape, rather than being generally flat in its profile, it's going through these big undulations. There's a sort of a hill right here that goes down into a long kind of trench right here, and then it undulates up onto the next one, and beyond that it goes right back down. And if I turn around to the other side, we see the same thing. So there's a little bit of a hill right here that I'm standing on, and then it goes down, and then it undulates back up, and beyond that it goes down, and there's actually a creek over there. But this is just you know, something to tune your eye to. This is the kind of stuff that you'll start to see when you get outside and you start looking for, what can I actually notice in the forest floor in terms of these minor little changes in topography that wouldn't show up on a topographical map. There may be just a few feet of change here and there. There's a lot of different ways that these patterns can show up, and it's amazing how much variety there is even in the same forest. You just go to a different part of the forest and the layout of the forest floor can be completely different. It can be really interesting to think about, why is that happening? What is this telling me about the place that I live in? How is this going to affect the movement of water? How is it going to affect the movement of animals? How does it change associations with plants and with the types of trees that live there? And if you start following this line of thinking, you are going to learn so much about your forest. And it's all going to come from your own observation. So here we have another extremely common example that you'll probably run into at some point. We have a long trail here that's very flat and it's very straight. And if we look on this side, it dips down into a little ditch sort of space. Then if we turn over to this side, we have the same sort of thing, a little ditch. It goes down and then it comes back up. And this is a rail trail. And so it's an old rail bed that the elevation here was actually built up and flattened and integrated with drainage on either side. And it's a very common thing to find if you live in a place that has historically had a railroad. You know, this kind of stuff is all around us, but the main thing is that if you don't take the time to notice it, to observe, and to think critically about what's happening here, why am I seeing these changes in elevation that seem to have a very distinct pattern, you could very easily miss it. One more thing I want to point out here. I'm on the trail. There's a ditch right here. There's not so much of a ditch on the other side. It's relatively flat. But if we go further back, there's a very definite hump of elevation that follows a pretty distinct line right along here. Standing up on top here, it kind of has the feel of like a big debris pile. This is the sort of thing that I often see when there's like an old edge to a farm field where they've piled up rocks and debris and things along a border that sat there for a very long time, collecting leaves and turning it into soil and basically softening up all the edges. It has a very bumpy up and down surface with lots of little high points and low points. And if we compare this to the surrounding forest, I mean, the surrounding forest is just way more flat. This is obviously some sort of landscape feature that was built in the history of this forest. So this is exactly the kind of stuff that you'll see as you get out and you start tuning your eyes to these little bumps and dips in the forest. You'll be walking along and the forest floor will look very uniform, and then all of a sudden you'll notice this huge line. I mean, it goes for hundreds and hundreds of feet. This line of, you know, just like a bump that goes up and then it goes right back down. But it is telling you something. It is something to observe, and it's a feature of the forest that has information to tell us. Again, it might have certain associations with plants. It might have certain associations with animals like chipmunks, and then, you know, when the chipmunks are there, they're going to bring in other predators and that kind of stuff. So there can be a whole ecology of life around these sorts of points where you see a break in the pattern of the forest floor that just comes from making basic observations. So I hope you found this video interesting. It's a skill that I've been working on for a long time, like since I first started getting interested in nature observation and awareness. I've always been fascinated by how there's these things in the forest, like the forest floor, that everybody ignores. You know, people just don't pay attention to this, but it has so much information to tell us, and we can learn so much about our landscape. It helps us situate ourselves so we can navigate more fluently. It teaches us about where to find different types of plants and how the plants associate with different places, and then by extension how the animals are interacting with those places. at the same time, it really is one of the easiest skills to develop, because all you have to do is have that intention when you go out to look for it. Just look for these changes in micro topography, and as soon as you start looking for it, you will start to see it everywhere. And just, you know, going out for a wander with this as your focus, even just once or repeat it a few times, it doesn't take long before those observation skills start to become a habit, and you'll find yourself walking in a forest sometime, and a particular landscape feature will just sort of pop out at you. You'll see a change in elevation, you'll see a big bump in the forest, or you'll see a big dip in the forest, and it'll stand out to you. And it's because you've built this habit of looking for changes in topography. It's just a habit. It's a habit of awareness. Once you develop it, it becomes more and more natural. It becomes a part of you. And then you start moving through the forest in a new way, in a way that makes you a lot more tuned in, a lot more observant, and just gives you that edge of understanding what's happening. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video.